Well, first up, I just wanted to say thank you to the youth who participated this morning. I really appreciate it. So I spent some time this week trying to focus on patience. And, as I'm entering into finals week at the First Academy and working on a worship service and planning a sermon and then just being, a husband and father of three, I was like, you pray for patience and God's going to give you the opportunity to display it. So this story here, it isn't about my son Jaden, but it certainly could be. So there's a kindergarten teacher up north, the North Country, Minnesota. We get nice and cold in the winter. She had just reached the end of a long day at the end of a long week. She noticed one of her, little students kind of struggling in the corner to get his boots on. So he asked for help, and she could see why. Even with her kind of pushing from one side and he's pulling, the boots just would not go on. So by the time she got both boots actually on him, she had actually kind of worked up a bit of a sweat. So she almost whimpered, when the little boy said, "Teacher, they're on the wrong feet." And she looked up, and sure enough, they were. It wasn't any easier pulling the boots off than it was getting them on in the first place. But she managed to keep her cool as she went about taking them off and then switching and getting them back on the right feet this time. And that's when he chose to announce, "These aren't my boots." And so she actually had to bite her tongue a little bit rather than get in his face and say, "Then why didn't you say so in the first place?" So once again, after asking for a little grace from God, she untied the boots and forcibly took them off again. So when she had them up is when he said, "They're my brother's boots. My mommy made me wear them this morning." So she didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this point. But she mustered up some patience and one more time got those boots on. So we're talking a good 15 minutes of her Friday afternoon have been eaten up already at least. So as she helped him up off the floor and, started heading towards, the outdoors, which, leave themselves a nice Minnesota cold, she asked, "So now where are your mittens?" "I stuffed them in the toes of my boots," she said, or he said, so. And that is why I'm not a kindergarten teacher. Patience in the midst of frustration. But so in preparing for this, little lesson on patience, I spent a lot of time in, obviously in Samuel, but I looked elsewhere and actually started off with a couple of Proverbs on patience. So I like the book of Proverbs a lot. Short little nuggets of wisdom, I like to think of them as. But out of 1911, it says, "A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." Proverbs 16:32, "Patience is better than strength. Controlling your temper is better than capturing a city." 14:29, "Whoever is patient has great understanding. The one who is quick-tempered displays folly." 15:18, "A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel." And then also 25, verse 25, with patience, a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone." And I actually looked up a commentary on this just to kind of see what was Solomon probably getting at here. And it just kind of explained that a soft tongue more looked at like soft, gentle words. Someone can be more easily persuaded to make a decision. So when he says a soft tongue will break a bone, you could read it in the Hebrew vernacular as being a soft voice can break a bone, or with gentleness and respect, even a strong bone, or for example, a hard-headed person could be persuaded, but only if accompanied by patience. So obviously we understand patience is important. And I looked up just in general 4 good definitions of patience. What is it? Be patient, have patience. So what does that mean? What is it? The first one I found was patience is self-restraint, which does not hastily retaliate against a wrong. So, how much of us have ever been wronged by someone? Maybe it's even, I always talk to people about the Florida drivers down here, because in Minnesota I thought we drove bad, but then I come down here. Don always tells me it's that everyone moves here, and the Florida drivers are good, but everybody else that comes down is not so good. But we've probably been wronged once or twice in traffic. I've heard the expression, it wouldn't be hard to be patient if it weren't for other people. But anyways, a man and his wife were awoken one morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, to someone banging on the door. I mean, it's 3 a.m., right? What do? You got the shotgun, or you just, what's going on here? So the man gets up, goes down to the floor where this drunken individual, this guy standing there in the pouring rain, asking for a push. And he's like, not a chance, says the husband, and he slams the door, walks upstairs. And the wife's like, who is that? He's like, some idiot out front just asking for a push. And she's like, well, you've got a short memory. Remember, like 3 months ago, we were stuck on the side of the road, and those 2 young guys came and gave us a push and got us out of there. I mean, we'd have been stuck without them. So just kind of gave them the, that look the wives give. My wife's giving me that right now. I'm going to look over here. And so the husband's like, so he grudgingly does what is told and gets dressed, goes down into the pouring rain, and, gets out there, and he's kind of like, it's dark, it's raining. He's like, hey, you still out here? Yes, comes the answer, from somewhere in the distance. So the guy starts walking, kind of following the voice. Hey, do you still need a push? Yes, please. Awesome. And so he starts walking. Well, where are you? The guy says, I'm over here on the swings. I might want to hastily retaliate against that wrong. So we run into people sometimes that make us impatient, cause us to maybe want to fly off the handle real quick. But patience is also the ability to accept delay or disappointment graciously. Josh had talked about Abraham telling Sarah that he would provide a child for them. And again, they were well on in age, but they didn't trust God. They grew impatient. And so they had him sleep with Hagar and have a child. And she gave birth to Ishmael. There was no patience, no waiting upon the Lord. God's idea of patience might not be our idea of patience. We're a little bit more like, it's been like 5 minutes. We're waiting. I've been waiting patiently, but, he may have a grander scheme in mind. A lot of us tend to do things that way. We tend to take matters into our own hands, not trusting God. An example from my life would be, a lot of people know how, Sarah and I moved down here in 2009 before we came down again 2 years ago. But for those who don't, we did. And the backstory there, though, is that I'd wanted to live in Florida since I was a kid. I loved the climate down here. As I got older, got out of high school and out of the, snow pants and boots days, I didn't care for the snow so much. Not much for ice fishing, snowmobiling. Give me a boogie board in the ocean, and I'm good. I'm not much of an outdoorsman up there. So and she was right on board of that too. She loved it down here, and so we got married. And initially, we immediately wanted to make the move. So we started looking for ways to make it happen. We didn't wait upon the Lord, and so we'd only been married for about 9 months when we actually ended up moving. 36 weeks pregnant, by the way, when we road tripped down. Probably not the best choice. But we were going to do it, just on hope and dreams. We were going to make it happen. And, so she found a job, and she had been working in a nice corporate office, good hours, close to home. And she ended up, we lived in Avalon, and she ended up having to commute all the way down to Millennial Mall from there, and ended up working at a retail store, working like 60 hours a week, while I stayed home with Hannah, who was 4 at the time, and our brand newborn, Jaden. Not a lot of social interaction for Dad here. And money got tight. I actually ended up having to take a overnight job. So here she is working 60 hours a week, coming home, quick dinner, and then high five out the door. Off I go to my overnight job. And then I come back home and high five again as I'm dragging, and she heads off to work. So life wasn't the best. We only made it like 8 months. And we were both kind of depleted emotionally because we never saw each other, and financially, the bank account was plenty depleted. And so we had to go back. We were both able to secure good jobs, our old jobs back in Minnesota, and we had to wait. And we actually had to wait like 4 years. Again, we'd been married for 9 months when we made the plunge down here the first time, but God's timing was different. We weren't trying to force it. We just kind of were. I'd say we prayed without ceasing the more time went on, but we did, and it was crazy how it was so. I mean, the only word is ridiculously beyond obvious that it was God's timing at that time, because Sarah's job just was basically laid in her lap for an opportunity for us to move, and then we came down. It was so funny because she actually had been commuting a little bit, like road tripping or flying down to Atlanta for a little bit, and she's like, well, I'm going to bring the car down because I think it looks like we're going to be able to move to Florida shortly. And the day before she is going to make this road trip down to Atlanta, I get a call that I have an interview at a bank in Orlando that I can, apply with. So, like overnight, I pack up the bags, and the next day we take off for Atlanta. And while we're down here, we're able to quickly walk a couple of houses and pick out a house. And, we're like, well, we're going to trust in faith that you're going to get that job that you had an interview for, because we just are really getting that feeling. And the house stays open for us. We sign the dotted line. A week later, I get a call. The job's yours. We move down. I think we were down here for like a week before Brian said, oh, there's this church you should check out. Because last time we came down here, that was one thing missing too. We didn't really get connected with the church. So we were here for 3 weeks maybe before we came to our first OCC service. And the first time we walked out in the parking lot, got in the car, we're like, well, we found our church. And then Sarah got a better job because her job still had her commuting a little bit to Atlanta. And then I got a much better job working at TFA. My kids get to go to a Christian school. They're coming home memorizing Bible verses, and it's just door after door. It's seriously, it's okay, God, I'm sure other people need to be blessed too, It's pretty cool, but being patient on God's timing, it's we haven't felt like we had to force any of this. The door is just open. And they certainly weren't opening in 2009, were they, honey? But also, thirdly, patience is the powerful attribute that enables a man or woman to remain steadfast under strain and continue pressing on. Remaining steadfast. I looked that up with my handy thesaurus, because I'm what does steadfast really mean? Came up with unwavering, persistent, committed, dedicated, firm. So remaining those things when you're under duress. How many of us have been under strain this week? I'm sure a couple of us could say yes to that. So, but remaining steadfast under that strain. So, but patience is a calm also, a calm endurance based on the certain knowledge that God is in control. Out of the book of Exodus, great Bible story. We all know the parting of the Red Sea. Chapter 14, Moses is bringing the Israelites. They just left Egypt. Life's good, yeah. And then we get out to the Red Sea, And as the Israelites typically did, as soon as any kind of calamity presents itself, oh, now what? And then all of a sudden you see the Pharaoh and his army behind you, and they start coming at Moses like, why don't you leave us? At least we could have lived there and had food and shelter. We're going to die to the hands of the army now. And Moses says to them in verse 13, do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never again see. But then the next line he says, I'm sure I wouldn't have known without looking it up. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. That endurance based on the certain knowledge that God is in control. So, patience is important. It's not easy to develop, though, is it? It kind of goes against our nature as humans. When you're feeling the most pressure, that's usually when we start to grow impatient. My wife could vouch for that this week. I've grown a little impatient at times. But even when a baby wakes up in the middle of the night, needs to be changed or is hungry, they're not going to be, Mom and Dad are really sound asleep right now. I'm going to wait till a more ideal time to wake them up. Maybe when they go to the bathroom or something, I'll cry out. It's not our nature. We aren't naturally patient, And also it goes against our culture. And look at our culture in America. We are not a patient nation. The average annual cost for running red lights in our country is $7 billion. Every year people pay that much. Trying to sneak through that. It's not really yellow anymore, but I'm going to go anyways. Yet the average amount of time saved by running red light is less than 50 seconds. But boy, had to get there. And we do it too. I do it all the time. If I just make the red light, it's like, woo! Kids, look what we did. Don't tell Mom. It's our culture. We're taught that. We're taught to be impatient. One of my favorite comic strips as a kid was Calvin and Hobbes. I used to love that. And there's one where the dad's sitting there at the chair, and he's kind of looking, kind of wiping the forehead a little bit, and he's like, it used to be that if a client wanted something done in a week, it was considered a rush job. He'd be lucky to get it. But now with all the modern technology, everybody's wanting everything instantly. Right at that time, Calvin's walking by holding a TV dinner. He's looking at it. It takes 6 minutes to microwave this, but who's got that kind of time? It's just our culture right now. So anyways, all of that to say, getting back to Hannah, the song of Hannah, Hannah's patience. Well, to make sure we're all on the same page here, for those who don't spend a lot of time in the book of Samuel, there was this guy named Elkanah. He had 2 wives. The one had many children. It doesn't say exactly how many. I've seen some that say, well, it could have been 10, because at one time he says to Hannah, aren't you more important, or isn't this more important than 10 sons? But they aren't sure. But she had sons and daughters, so we know she had plenty of kids. And Hannah didn't have any. Hannah was barren. It was magnified. The situation was magnified by a couple of things. For one, every year they would go up for their sacrifice and worship. I think they were originally supposed to be doing it 3 times a year, but a lot of them only did it once. So they'd go up once a year to this thing, and on the way, Hannah would be just tormented by the other wife, Peninnah. She'd always be just kind of, making comments, just kind of, probably the I've got kids, you don't, kind of stuff, and just tormenting her. And to the point where she would be in tears, and she wouldn't eat. She would weep and refuse to eat. So, she was in rough shape with this childless thing. But one of the years, she went up there. She actually left the group after they had eaten. And it says she went up, and through her tears she prayed, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. And at this time, Eli, the temple priest, was witnessing this. He came over. They had a brief conversation, but he ended it by saying, "May the God of Israel grant what you have asked of him." And in time she did conceive, gave birth to a son, who she named Samuel. And in keeping to her word, she did give him to the Lord, and he went and lived with Eli, the temple priest. And that's kind of the story. Couple things, sidebar, just so you know, Samuel, kind of an important person in the Bible for those who don't spend a lot of time in the Old Testament. Hannah's son Samuel would be basically the new priest, the new kind of God's leader for his people. They didn't have a king at that time. And he would take over for Eli as Eli's sons. I won't get into the details. They weren't the best of men. And he later would be the one to anoint Saul as king. He also would later be the one to anoint David as the king. So played a big role. This was Hannah's, a lot of people forget when they're reading those stories. That was Hannah's son, the son that she prayed for, received, and gave back to God. So, but also, to get back to Hannah and her patience, think about this. How long did she go without a son? I mean, she wouldn't have made it, in today's culture, you wouldn't think. Again, now. I mean, a lot of commentaries tend to believe that it probably would have been a decade she would have been married to, because she was his first wife. She was Elkanah's first wife. So she would have married for a decade to him, very likely, before he even took a second wife to make sure that he had kids. And it said that she had many kids. Some say possibly as many as 10. How long does it take to have 10 kids? So, you know what I mean? So it's quite possible that she went 20 plus years easily without a child. And a decade of this being tormented by this other wife. I mean, that took a lot of patience. Do we have that kind of patience? Do we have that patience to wait decades for God's timing? So wait patiently for the blessings that will come in the Lord's time. What we want or what has been prophesied may not occur again in our timing. Keep in mind, too, that after she had him, she did follow through with what she said she was going to do. And she gave him back to God, meaning if they only went up to the temple, in Shiloh once a year, that means that she only got to see her son once a year. So the patience, even after she had him, to wait every year just for that brief period of time to spend a little time with her son. So, Psalms 27:14 says, "Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thine heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord." And even an example from Jesus. Jesus was patient. Jesus is patient. A lot of people don't think about it in this context, but Jesus was on earth for 33 years, give or take. He waited 30 of those years before he began his public ministry. I mean, if it were me or, in our timing, if some CEO was running Jesus' life, okay, we got 33 years, so, okay, here's what we're doing, this, by 4, you are in some training here, and, we're going, But that wasn't God's model. He spent 30 years, and he was being groomed. He was preparing, but it wasn't time yet. It wasn't God's timing yet. He also, near the end of his life, was very patient with his disciples. I mean, Peter, James, and John in the garden. He was under extreme duress here, obviously knowing he's just hours away from his death, and a quite painful death. And it says that when he would go off to pray, that in anguish, his sweat became like drops of blood. And I'd actually looked into this. I had a friend who was into biology in college and actually shared this as one of his little discipleships he did during our football season. But that in rare conditions, medical science will prove this, that under extreme grave stress, that the blood vessels will break and actually mix with the sweat in their sweat glands. And it literally was like blood coming out of his forehead there. So clearly he's stressed, And when he arrives back to find them sleeping, doesn't do what I would have done. He doesn't like, guys, look at me here. What's going on right now? It's kind of a big deal. He doesn't snap on them. He doesn't, lose his temper. He just says, could you not keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you will not fall into temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. And Jesus is patient. He's patient with us. I hope we all understand the fact that He's a God of grace, that salvation is a gift of grace. We sometimes forget to tie in the patience with that. That door of salvation is still open. It hasn't been closed yet, and it's still because Jesus is patient. The door to eternity in heaven, still open because Jesus is patient. He hasn't done a last call yet. He hasn't. If you haven't figured it out by now, sorry, I got end of the world to plan, heaven, all sorts of stuff. Don't got time. He's patient. Our opportunity to accept His gift of grace is still available because He's patient. So think about that.